On Monday, Britain's Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood announced in Parliament what she calls the most sweeping changes to the asylum system in a generation, and she was applauded by right-wingers who thought that she had undergone a Damascene conversion and been won round to the merits of the immigration restriction position. Now, these didn't touch legal migration, but they ostensibly fixed illegal migration by making it easier to deport people, disapplying things like Article 3 and Article 8 in ECHR cases with primary legislation pending, and stopping the small boats. However, yet again, it's smoke and mirrors, it's bait and switch, and actually Shabana Mahmood's reforms end up bringing in more men who would have otherwise crossed the channel in dinghies via new safe and legal routes, and creating new ways for people from the third world to get chartered flights straight into Britain. What Shabana Mahmood was doing was counting on her incontinent opposition, the deranged liberals on the backbenches of the Labour Party, and both the online right and Reform UK to do her PR for her, because Labour are hemorrhaging support to Reform in the north, and, of course, to Muslim independent parties in constituencies like Shabana's. And so, if Labour don't look credible on the small boats issue, which is ubiquitously hated across the country, 9 in 10 constituencies want immigration reduced, and that's when the majority of people think immigration is illegal, not legal, and that's when they think that the net migration level is 70,000, not 700,000, as it was when the survey was taken. So, this is the most popular issue in the country, it is a national crisis, and so Mahmood understands that if she can get the boats off everyone's TV screens, from GB News, and off their social media feeds, and then regulate illegal migration, or irregular migration as they call it, and have the same people who would break into the country otherwise pass through the passport gates of Heathrow and Gatwick with the prerequisite paperwork, then the optics have improved, then she looks like she is doing something, and it salvages Labour's electoral prospects, and makes it more likely for her to succeed Keir Starmer, given he's the most unpopular Prime Minister on record. Apparently, he's in bunker mode in Downing Street right now. They're about to get even more unpopular on the 26th of November when Rachel Reeves delivers her budget. And so, Mahmood positions herself to both the right and the left as Britain's first Muslim female Prime Minister, but also someone who has credibility on the number one issue affecting voters: illegal, and more broadly, legal migration. Now, this is a bait and switch, don't get it wrong, and we'll go through the policies in a moment, but backbenchers like Stella Creasy, who is terminally affected with yank brain and constantly accuses the Trump administration of being literally the Handmaid's Tale, or literally Nazi Germany, decided to write a piece in The Guardian on the day of the announcement, saying that in reality, if this policy becomes law, the UK will require ICE-style raids to remove people and their children. If a ceasefire is negotiated with Putin, will the nearly 250,000 Ukrainians who have come here over the past 4 years and counting be forced to go home or be deported without second glance, regardless of the lives they may have built here now? Yes, Stella. I mean, if only, Stella, if only we had the strong government willing to defend our people and deport foreign criminals that your fevered imagination conjures up. But regarding the Ukrainians, yes, they were never granted indefinite leave to remain. They were always here on the condition that they would go home after the war was ended, whether or not it was won. And so the idea is, yes, all refugees should do that. Not that we should take any refugees in the first place. We're the remotest possible country from every other war zone. We're literally an island at the other end of Europe, separated from the North American landmass by the Atlantic Ocean. Like, they go through so many countries before getting to us. There should not be a single refugee in Britain unless they are from France. And even then, they're French. Dear Lord, why would we want them? Just joking, guys, no more brother wars. But the idea that refugees should be able to stay in a country forever, even if the wars are over and their country is safe and sound, means that asylum is just another way for foreigners to come to our country and live here at our expense. The purpose of a system is what it does, and no matter what the label is on the visa, the outcome is more third worlders living permanently in Britain and being a reliable voting class for left-wing parties, the likes of which Stella Creasy belongs to, and also the likes of which Rumpelstiltskin, that's Carla Denyer, one of the Green Party MPs from Bristol, also belongs to, because the Green Party are nipping at the heels of Labour. They have eclipsed them in the polls. Labour has fallen to 4th place, with tit hypnotist himself, Zach Polanski, who changed his name to be more Jewish despite being in a party with anti-Zionist Muslims. Very confusing. They are now above Labour because they've just self-declared to be the gay race communist party for Muslims and foreigners. And it turns out, thanks to Labour and the Conservatives' immigration policies, there's a pretty big constituency for that. But Shabana Mahmood bit back at Carla Denyer because the deputy leader of the Green Party, a councillor in Somerset, actually wrote a letter saying, well, refugees are welcome, but not here. Not 600 men in a military barracks in my constituency, which is almost 99% white English, because it might cause threats and problems with the local community. She then did a video calling them all doctors, lawyers, and engineers, unironically. What, are they just going to break into people's houses and build Apollo 11 in their back garden? Is that the threat that they're presenting? Or are you implicitly admitting, their deputy leader of the Green Party, that these foreign criminals might be committing sex and violent crimes at a much higher rate than British nationals? That's not even broken down by ethnicity. So, Shabana Mahmood, who is quite savvy in her messaging, pulled Carla Denyer up on this, and as you can see, with the juvenile screeching and jumping up and down that she does in a second, Shabana Mahmood has played these people like a fiddle, until very recently. But she was banking on them reacting like this, and doing her PR for her. Denyer's freakout just positions Mahmood as credible on the one issue that the public care about, and the one issue that they definitely don't trust Labour to fix. But beyond the outrage, beyond the headlines, what are the actual policies? Let's go to The Guardian, who are the least likely to be happy about this, given that they found the 1 woman and 2 children that have crossed the English Channel in the last few years to put in a photo, when it's over 85% men from majority Muslim countries who commit disproportionate amounts of sex crime. But the policies are, people with refugee status could return to their home if the country is deemed safe. It has to be deemed safe by Home Office civil servants. The same Home Office civil servants who recently denied an application by a Christian asylum seeker fleeing forced conversion in a Muslim country by lying and saying that the government had deemed it safe when their own reports had not. So this is all being filtered through the ideological activists embedded in the Home Office, which we'll get to later. People granted asylum will have to wait much longer to become UK citizens. It's now going to be a potential 20 years to do so, and they have to reapply for their asylum to be renewed every 2.5 years. But there are exemptions to this, and there are going to be a lot of people who are exempt from these changes, as Mahmood decided to omit from her announcement. The right to family life claims could be curbed under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, the most common article which is appealed to frustrate deportation flights. However, as we'll get onto in a moment, you don't actually do this without primary legislation or leaving the European Convention on Human Rights. And given Mahmood herself is a lawyer, and Keir Starmer is a human rights lawyer who wrote the textbook for lawyers on how to apply Tony Blair's Human Rights Act in 1998, which, according to its own wording, more subtly wove the ECHR into British law, it's unlikely that they're going to do this or leave the convention outright. And even if they did, we would still have the UN Refugees Convention's absurd definition of a refugee being someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin because they fear persecution for their identity, their race, or their political opinions. That's still embedded into British law. And so if they're not going to repeal those laws, then nobody's getting deported. So, yet again, this is all smoke and mirrors, so they can be seen to be doing something about the issue that most people care about, while they do absolutely nothing, and there is a steady stream of foreigners, illegal and legal, increasingly legal, because they're just being given the paperwork, and suddenly all the illegal migration becomes legal, but there's a steady stream of legal migrants coming into our country whether we like it or not. The Ukrainians that were welcomed to the UK would also then have to return when the Ukrainian war is settled. That's nothing new. A removal of automatic benefits and checks on high-value items owned by asylum seekers. There were headlines going around that she was going to confiscate their watches and their jewellery in order to pay for their hotels. And Adnan Hussein, who today got in a flame war with me on Twitter because he declared himself British when he said, "I'm a Pakistani and I'm proud of my race," before, he said this was persecution of minority groups and it's utterly unconscionable. Yeah, I don't think that the assets of Ahmed and Abdul are going to be seized when they rock up on Dover Beach and get a prayer bump from kissing the pebbles. I don't actually think that they're going to be taken. Instead, they're still going to be probably put up at five-star accommodation at our expense, or when those hotels are closed down, as is promised, they're going to be dropped into houses of multiple occupancy. So we, taxpayers, are going to be paying for the houses that the next generation can't afford to put foreign criminals up in them, 10 to a man, who don't pay tax and work for Deliveroo. And those houses are going to be in your neighbourhoods, near your families, near schools. Just like the Bell Hotel in Epping was, which, yet again, the Home Office took out multiple lawyers to try to stop the attempt by the local council and concerned parents to close down the hotel, and they were overruled. So we paid for our own legal action against ourselves after Hadush Kabatu broke into the country 8 days later, sexually propositioned a schoolgirl and a bunch of other women, denied it, was told that he was of good character by the judge because he hadn't committed any other crimes in the 8 days between breaking into the country and committing the sex offence, was then convicted, was then accidentally released, was then caught after a 2-day manhunt, and was then paid £500 to go back to Ethiopia. He should have been rotting in the Horn of Africa in the first place, but instead, men like him will get into our country, illegally or increasingly legally, and then be housed in homes that your children might like to buy, right by you, at your expense. Great. But this was the most egregious part of it, that was buried in the summary and was not part of the headlines. New legal routes to the UK are going to be introduced. Mahmood says the government will introduce new safe and legal routes to the UK as a way to reduce the number of dangerous journeys in small boats across the Channel. Because remember, the asylum seekers, the fake refugees, the illegal migrants, the foreign criminals, are the real victims. Because it's not that they're crossing the Channel and breaking into our country and living at our expense that's the problem. No. It's that they're risking their lives to do so. So instead, if we just made the process orderly and safer by allowing them to apply digitally, by allowing them to be sponsored by NGOs and Muslim community organisations abroad, and then allowing them to have charter flights straight to the UK, to then be housed at our expense, to be sponsored by these organisations that get money from the taxpayer via the Home Office, then it's just totally fine. Because it's no longer illegal, you're no longer watching it on the news, there's no longer this obvious eyesore that reminds you of how exploited we're being. No. Instead, they're just going to come through the passport gates, the same men, and everything's going to be fine. Because it's legal and you have no complaints, right? This is the bait and switch. They're just going to make the illegal migration legal, and you're going to get even more of them. And, of course, there's still going to be illegal migration, because the worst criminals who are going to get rejected by these new safe and legal routes, no matter how permissive they are still going to want to come here and take advantage, so they're still going to pay international people smuggling gangs who use Islamic halawala finance to do so, in order to break into the country. So we're just going to get more migrants. And illegal migration is going to continue, nobody's going to get deported, and legal migration is still going to be high. They've just lied to our face. We have this false binary set up, this Hobson's choice, between accept unlimited numbers of foreign fighting-age males breaking into your country over the English Channel, or, as every Question Time plant audience member suggests, establish safe and legal routes to allow the same men to come into your country, but just with the appropriate paperwork, rather than discarding it at the bottom of the channel and forming a veritable coral reef out of wet passports down there. I presume that the mountain of wet documents has gotten so high that the dinghies were running aground, and that was the cause for concern that Shabana Mahmood had for these poor, benighted, people smuggler paying foreign criminals, and instead would just rather that they fly in straight from Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Eritrea, and all of the other places that practice British values. That according to Shabana Mahmood, Anthony Williams, the Huntington train stabber, is as British as you and me, despite being a mass stabber and attempting to stab a 14-year-old child, just because he was born in Britain. So it turns out the values don't even matter, it's just being on the soil. According to the government, the routes will be capped and are designed to give communities a greater say about the presence of refugees and better support for asylum seekers, including help to learn English to a high standard. Right, so we're going to be paying for their English lessons, paying for their translators, and of course, when it says communities a greater say, what that means is people with family members or an ethnic religious tie to the third world will then have an incentive to apply for all of these and bring over their co-ethnics, their kin, their cousins, and their countrymen into our country. It's the same way that H-1B visas operate in America. Basically, because there are diasporas in Silicon Valley with ethno-nepotistic hiring practices and visa mills in India, where there is no prohibition against lying, cheating, and stealing to advantage yourself, your family, your clan, and your caste. These symbiotic networks exploit the visa lottery system, and so 71% of all H-1B recipients are Indians. So you're going to get the same here, where this is just going to be a visa mill for the Muslim world. I wonder why Shabana Mahmood wanted this to happen. Skilled refugees will be able to come to the UK for work, building on the Displaced Talent Mobility Pilot, which was launched in 2021 under the previous government. Thanks, Conservatives. Thank you, Boris Johnson. Thank you, Rishi Sunak. Your betrayal will never be forgotten. Displaced Talent Mobility just means importing more people from overseas whose credentials are inferior to ours and that we can't verify, to bring them over to fill jobs that we hypothetically need filled because we keep increasing the population thanks to mass migration, who then will inevitably drop out of those positions and go to work for Deliveroo. Because that's exactly what happened with the health and social care visa, by the way, because 70,000 health and social care visas were given out and only 11,000 vacancies were filled in 2023. So where did all those nurses and care workers go? Disappeared into the system, and we're currently paying for them. Mahmood also wrote to the embassies of Angola, Namibia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, warning them that they won't be granted visas for legal citizens to visit our country if they don't take back their illegal migrants. Now, it's curious that she says this, because she's trying to look as if she's tough, but number one, there's a 3-strike system here. The first 2 strikes are to do with whether or not their ambassadors wait in longer queues at the airport to enter our country. It's only on the 3rd strike that general admission visas will be denied. And why were these 3 countries targeted? Because, conspicuously, although they are African shitholes, they are majority Christian. And they're not the majority nations that are exploiting the asylum system and coming over as illegal migrants. How curious. Well, which ones are? Because on the same day that Mahmood made this announcement, the new visa numbers released. A total of 834,977 visas were issued to foreign nationals in the year to June 2025. Nearly 1 million people again came to our country. I think at this point, it's just the physical size of the Home Office that is restricting the ability for civil servants to rubber stamp the approval of foreigners to enter Britain. Like, if they just had more desks, we'd be up to 2 million. Reminder for my American viewers, you guys have legal migration running at 1 million a year. You currently have net emigration, thanks to the Trump administration's mass deportation and self-deportation policies. Lord Jesus, I've seen what you've done for other people, and I want it for me too. Of this figure, the most common nationality was Indian, because of course it was. If more Indians was the solution to anyone's problems, India would have no problems. But if you just use Google Maps and drop your cursor along any street in India, you'll see that India has plenty of problems, like public littering and defecation, which is now why a whole river in Oxfordshire has beside it an entire river of trash. Britain has its own Ganges now. I wish I was joking. Look at this. We are officially a 3rd world country. Remember what the politicians have done to this green and pleasant land? Never forgive, never forget, denaturalize and deport. The next most common nations were China, 114,128 visas. That's 13% of the total. Bear in mind, the Chinese students do go home, but why are we training the sons and daughters of the CCP when we know that they open secret police stations in our country, steal our secrets, commit espionage, and try to spy on members of parliament? We should just ban all visas from China. Then Pakistan is in 3rd place, 69,580 visas, that's 8.3%. Oh, I'm so glad we're importing more Mir Puris in the midst of the grooming gang scandal going global and people realizing the atrocities that Pakistani Biradiri cousin-marrying clans have committed against white English girls in the untold thousands in our country. Yeah, brilliant, let's bring over more potential perpetrators and family members to cover that up. I'm sure Shabana Mahmood has nothing to say about that. Nigeria, 45,966, that's 5.5% of the total. What we needed, clearly, was more Nigerian nurses committing industrial-scale qualifications fraud, according to The Guardian, by having their own children fill out their forms, and then they take jobs where life and death is very much a concern, but don't speak English. And the US. God bless America. you guys can still come over. I still think we should have like an Anglosphere right of return policy, like Israelis do with Jewish people who have like a Jewish grandparent. If you are heritage American or heritage Australian, a proper Anglo-Celt, then yeah, you can come over and marry our people. You just gotta, tone down the voice and keep up with the drinking. Curiously though, the nations targeted by Shabana Mahmood, the DRC, Namibia, and Angola, were only 299 visas, 273 visas, and 140 visas. Now, should that be 0? Yes. Is it going to be 0? No. Why did she pick on those nations rather than Pakistan, which has the largest number of visas and therefore would be pretty good leverage? Pakistan also gets £133 million a year in foreign aid from us. I think we could probably pull those purse strings quite tight if they don't want to take back their grooming gang perpetrators who renounce their British citizenship to prevent their deportation. The overall number of visas granted for employment, study, family, or humanitarian reasons has fallen by 32% in the year June 2024 to 2025. Keep going. As for illegal migration, the 5 worst offending nations were Afghanistan, Eritrea, Iran, Sudan, and Syria. Oh, brilliant, open-air jihadist camps are just emptying themselves out into my country, followed by Vietnam, Somalia, Iraq, Yemen, and Turkey. Great bit of trivia for you. Not only are 72% of Somalians in Britain living in social housing, a further like 25% are in prison. I'm pretty sure it's just Ayaan Hirsi Ali at this point, whose house I'm not paying for, who has come from Mogadishu. Large areas of London are the set of Black Hawk Down. Why are we doing this? Why am I battery farming Somalians? Don't know, perhaps Shabana Mahmood has some solutions. 48,478 people whose nationality is known were detected breaking into the UK either by a lorry or small boats. And of course, a lot more evaded detection, and some whose nationality we don't know and are not counted among the statistics. But do you notice that the Democratic Republic of Congo, Angola, and Namibia were not ranking among those nations? There were just 11 from the DRC, 3 from Angola, and none from Namibia included in those illegal migrants. So maybe they're exploiting the asylum system, whether or not they're arriving via small boats or lorries. Well, it turns out there are only 134 people from the DRC, 104 from Namibia, and 27 from Angola, despite 111,084 people applying for asylum in those 12 months, which is the highest number since records began in 2001. So which is the worst offending nation? The most common nationality was Pakistani. 9% of the total, 8,200 people. Now, Pakistan is horrible, but why are you seeking asylum from a country that has a nuclear program and that we give foreign aid to? If it's really that bad, we should stop giving them foreign aid, right? Are these all Pakistani Christians fleeing the death penalty for apostasy or blasphemy? I somehow doubt this. So why did Shabana Mahmood, a Pakistani woman, not leverage the 69,000 visas and £133 million in foreign aid that we give to Pakistan to deport Pakistanis back to Pakistan who are exploiting our asylum system and committing mass child sex crimes in our country? Boggles the mind. Perhaps it's because it would make the iftar dinner quite uncomfortable. So let's look at the policies themselves, because lots of people didn't read this document. And if you go to the conclusion, there's a summary here about the safe and legal routes that are being proposed. There's going to be an annual cap on arrivals. The Home Secretary is going to set an annual cap on arrivals through safe and legal routes based on community capacity. But don't worry, Shabana Mahmood has already promised that these are going to be, quote, modest, but will be lifted over time. Oh, brilliant. So we're going to get untold thousands of third worlders transported directly into our living rooms. Reformed resettlement and sponsorship. This is going to shift to a community sponsorship model as the main framework for refugee resettlement, with greater local and voluntary sector involvement. Translation: NGOs, charities, Muslim activist organisations are going to be able to pick named individuals from overseas based on people from their congregations in the mosques that have family members from overseas to sponsor, to then bring directly over, and using the money that they're paid by the taxpayer via the government, pay for them to stay. So this is just another transmission vector for men from the Muslim world to get into Britain and be housed at our expense. Thank you, Shabana Mahmood. Thank you, everyone who celebrated her, saying she's getting tough on immigration, she's using our talking points. You can pin your fell for it again badge squarely to your chest. Capped routes for students and skilled refugees are going to be introduced. new routes for refugee displaced students and skilled refugees to come to the UK for study or for work. This has already been happening, by the way, for Palestinians being flown via Jordan into Manchester in the dead of night on full scholarships to study in the UK. I'm sure that the population in the Muslim world that has the highest recorded support for suicide bombings to protect the reputation of Islam, according to Pew Research, will make great use of those engineering degrees, and they won't hold a grudge against Britons and indigenous white Brits for establishing Israel in 1948 in the first place. I'm sure that no terror attacks and violent jihadist murders will result from this disastrous policy. And it specifically says here, flexibility for global crises, including Ukraine and Gaza. Because that's the real point. Shabana Mahmood wants to retain her seat from her further ethnocentric and clannish Muslim opponents who are obsessed with Gaza. This is why the Gaza independent MPs got up and complained about this particular policy, with Shokat Adam saying that Shabana Mahmood risks inflaming far-right rhetoric and demonizing communities. Yet again, they're basically doing her PR for her by making her look like the sensible moderate, when instead she's going to import thousands of Palestinians to study and live at taxpayers' expense. Here's the full section on safe and legal routes. It says, the new model will give greater say to communities and support refugees as they settle, become self-sufficient and contribute to their local areas. There's always this hypothetical that refugees just want to come here, build a better life, contribute to our civilization. No, most of them hate us, will not reproduce our civilization, and just want to take from the taxpayers' largesse. They don't like us, they despise our religion, they despise our race, they have long-standing historical grudges, especially if they're from the Indian subcontinent, to Britain, and instead they just want to take your money and turn your country into a caliphate. Or a giant idol for Vishnu, who we should curse. No thanks. As you can see here, it says, the process will begin when the Home Secretary sets an annual cap on the number of arrivals that will be accepted through safe and legal routes. This will be based on the capacity and ability of communities to welcome refugees. Basically, the cap will be set on the number of immigrants that the NGOs that the Home Office pays and the mosques that they treat with say that they can handle. So the cap will be set according to what Muslim activist charities say they can accommodate. So, just how many people they want to bring in at any given time. So the cap is going to be determined by Shabana Mahmood, Muslim activist organisations, and open borders charities. So the cap is non-existent. And the definition of who qualifies as a refugee, as set here, will be according to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the UNHCR. If you want a reminder for what the UNHCR's definition of a refugee is, quote, a refugee, according to the convention, is someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. Well, that seems watertight and not liable for exploitation at all. Also, note here, you know that 20-year extension to get indefinite leave to remain, the right to stay in Britain and citizenship? It says, our intention is that those arriving on the reformed resettlement routes will be on the 10-year route to settlement, however this will be subject to wider consultation. So, it could even be lowered. Basically, the 20-year wait, rather than 5 years for indefinite leave to remain, has already been reduced to 10 for these new safe and legal routes that barely have a cap, that just incentivize the men who would otherwise break into the country via a small boat across the channel to apply digitally, be sponsored by a Muslim activist organisation, be brought in, and therefore be rewarded for their good behaviour by becoming a permanent problem for the next government, because they have citizenship, and probably the next government aren't willing to use the Shamima Begum precedent to denaturalise and deport. But they should. The point of these reforms, as written here, are to enable the UK to support vulnerable people in need of protection while doing so in a way that is controlled. It provides support to refugees while remaining sustainable for the wider UK population. The reforms will also provide a clear alternative to entering the UK illegally. It's not that the people breaking into the country are immoral criminals who exploit us, who take our money, who commit crimes when they're here. No, it's just that they're going about it the wrong way. They don't have the paperwork. They're not registering on the spreadsheet. And so, if they just apply digitally, then you have no complaints, because they're legal, right? You must understand, we don't want any of them here. We want the ones that are already here to be denaturalized and deported. We want them gone. We don't want a single third world barbarian in our country demographically disfiguring and culturally terraforming our ancestral homeland. I would like the ethnically and culturally homogeneous country that my ancestors grew up in, and that lots of boomers took for granted, and so seek to conserve the institutions and procedures that have destroyed our country more than the demographic integrity of the people to whom the culture is intuitive and who will pass it down as custodians to their children. Under the part on reducing arrivals, it says that there is going to be the longer path to settlement, but also new requirements on family reunion. It says, under core protection, there will be no automatic right to family reunion. Those who could successfully move off core protection and enter a work and study visa route could become eligible to sponsor family members to come to the UK. Right, so those who arrive as refugees via any channel, those who gain asylum, could just switch their visa to a work or study visa. Just like under the Boris wave, when the inverse happened, where a bunch of foreign students applied to crap universities, and before their degree finished, they applied for asylum, or they milled about in Britain a bit after graduating, and then switched to a work visa to extend their stay, worked for Deliveroo for a while, not putting their rocket science and engineering degrees to good use, and then crossed the threshold for 5 years to apply for indefinite leave to remain, and got access to benefits, social housing, the NHS, and an expedited path to citizenship. So this is just the same in reverse. You're going to get refugees visa hopping to extend their stay again, and then not needing to renew their application every 2.5 years, which was the big headline-making thing saying that refugees might be sent home if every 2.5 years they get their visa reviewed by an activist in the Home Office, mind you, and their country is deemed safe. But then, what happens if the country is deemed safe, but they don't want to return because under the UN Refugee Convention, they're unwilling to go back? Then they're just going to appeal to Articles 2, 3, and 8 of the ECHR, right? Well, according to this new announcement, it notes that Article 8 rights are currently leading to high numbers of arrivals from those who would not otherwise have the right to live in the UK, and that this is the main source of appeal for frustrating deportation flights. Over half of family and private life applications made from within the UK are granted leave on the basis that refusing them would be a breach of Article 8, even though they don't meet the minimum income and English language requirements. So, the ECHR is allowing foreign criminals to stay in our country, is allowing failed asylum seekers to stay in our country, even though they contribute nothing and are not going to integrate in any meaningful sense whatsoever. The extent to which anyone is truly integrated overall, questionable. But this promises that Article 8 is a qualified right, and so they are going to strengthen the application of Article 8 and argue where it should be disapplied on the basis of public interest. It says that family is going to be redefined in primary legislation, when that's going to be brought forward, who knows, to mean only immediate family members, not the extended clan like one judge interpreted for an Afghan smuggled in via the super injunction charter flights that said you can bring up to 22 of your family members because family means something different in your culture. The problem with this is, as I've already said, it's going to take two lawyers, the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, who are wedded to human rights doctrine, to revisit this. And so, it's unlikely that either the primary legislation is going to be forwarded, or the attempt to disapply the law without primary legislation is going to stand up to scrutiny. And the perfect example of this is Article 3 of the ECHR. They note, Article 3 is an absolute right, which means it cannot be balanced against the public interest. So instead, they're going to reform modern slavery laws to make it so that it's harder to appeal using Article 3. But the issue with Article 3 is that before the 1998 Human Rights Act was even brought into being, in 1996, a Sikh nationalist who committed crimes in Britain was due to be deported, and he appealed via the European Court of Human Rights against the UK and won. And because of this, the ECHR ruled that because Article 3 is an absolute right, quote, in these circumstances, the activities of the individual in question, however undesirable or dangerous, cannot be a material consideration. Basically, no matter how severe the crimes they commit, whether they are sex offenders, murderers, or paedophiles, their crime cannot be a consideration if they appeal to Article 3. Which is why you get cases of Pakistani sex offenders saying, well, if I'm returned back to Pakistan, I might be persecuted by the Pakistani government for my crime. It's like, yeah, we should hang you here. The fact that we don't is a grave stain on our justice system and imbalances the moral ledger of our country. But their ability to say, I would be persecuted for the consequence of my actions, keeps them in our country because Article 3 is absolute. And you can't get out of Article 3, or Article 46, which says the ECHR is supreme over UK law, unless you leave the ECHR, which they're not prepared to do. So all of this is yet again smoke and mirrors to keep illegal migrants in our country, failed asylum seekers in our country, allow more asylum seekers to come over legally, and completely ignores legal migration, which is the leading cause of demographic replacement. I pointed all of this out on a lengthy thread that you can get on X. I do these sorts of things from time to time, so if you aren't following me, you should be. And if you don't have my videos on notification with the little bell below, and if you aren't subscribed already, you're missing out on some, I would say, pretty nourishing content. You get all this stuff early if you do follow and subscribe, because the following day, after I put out this thread, Shabana Mahmood just came out and admitted that she's doing new safe and legal routes, so she shot her own PR strategy in the foot. She captioned this with, "We're an open, tolerant and generous country." And I think it's because Reform UK were actually getting to her, because Richard Tice joked at a press conference after Mahmood made these announcements in the press that she should defect and join Reform UK. Now, I was frustrated at first because they were basically carrying water for her, when this effectively hid the fact that we're going to get more illegal and legal migrants coming in, staying forever. But I think Shabana Mahmood was actually so annoyed by the jokes made by Nigel Farage and Lee Anderson offering in Parliament at the announcement to allow her to defect to the party, because they put out this, frankly, cringe edit, and then she responded, as she did in Parliament, "over my dead body." And then afterwards, she put out the fact that, no, don't worry guys, question time audiences and left-wing activists, we're establishing new safe and legal routes that your NGO grievance grift can use to bring over infinitive Malians until the heat death of the universe. And so I think they kind of baited this out with her, actually. The day after Mahmood's announcement as well, these immigration figures were released. Don't believe the headlines, because what Mahmood is doing is, again, making immigration go up, and at the same time, these revisions by the Office for National Statistics show the rapid rate at which demographic replacement is happening, because it's not just about the net migration figure. It's not just about the total migration figure. Remember, net migration is inward migration flow offset by outward migration flow. And the outward migration flow is increasingly native Brits who feel dispossessed in their own country, who feel that the taxes are too high, who feel that the opportunities are elsewhere, and are willing to live in exile because of how bad the UK has become. And even though the headline says net migration last year was 20% lower than previously thought, the reason is not because they had drastically overestimated the number of people coming to the UK, because you can see the revision here. The reason is because officials at the ONS said new figures are based on how often people appear in tax and benefits records, providing a more accurate and active reflection of migrant activities in the UK. Meaning, 257,000 British nationals left the UK in 2024, while 143,000 Britons living abroad returned. This means a net emigration of Britons of 114,000 people, rather than the initial estimate of 17,000. Almost 100,000 more of our countrymen left than was previously reported. Now, that doesn't mean all 100,000 extra are native Brits. It could be foreigners with British passports going back to the home country, or moving to Dubai because they are transient anywheres looking to make good of whichever global bus station or job centre will give them a handout. However, it does mean that in that mix, thousands of our countrymen are leaving. They are taking not just the income with them. We are the #1 nation hemorrhaging millionaires in the world right now, and it's only going to get worse when income tax goes up, according to the leaks from the next budget. But also, they're taking the culture. They're taking their love of country that lives and beats like a fire in their breast. They're taking their affinity for robins singing in the treetops in the spring, and narrow country roads, and pub lunches. And no matter how badly London has been run, a reverence for the beauty of their architecture, the cathedrals in our towns and cities, for peace and quiet. They're all going. And they're going to be replaced by Palestinian engineering students, thanks to Shabana Mahmood. And those are the reforms that are being celebrated by people on our side. Very, very foolish. And this demographic replacement is why Parliament looks like a market in Uttar Pradesh right now. I pointed this out because I happened to catch this live. It is so exhausting to have an Indian, Iqbal Muhammad, a Pakistani, Shabana Mahmood, and a Bangladeshi, Ashpana Begum, arguing over the most effective and efficient route to import as many as their co-ethnics and Muslims into Britain as possible. Nowhere in this exchange is a British person represented. I have such endemic and terminal levels of fatigue that even though I do not want to leave my own country, if something were to push me, it's forcing me to watch this like I'm in Clockwork Orange.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Deporting families after they've resettled here because their country is deemed safe is simply wrong. Could the Home Secretary tell us how the government determines what a safe country is, and will she publish the criteria? And given that she mentioned the DRC earlier, is she really saying it is a safe country over there? And will she also publish all existing returns agreements so that members of this House and indeed the British public can properly scrutinise them? I have done the reading and it's not in the detail.
Home Secretary.
Well, we already do safe country reviews, so we would seek to continue that. They are publicly available in terms of our position on different countries, and in fact mostly pass through secondary legislation in this House. I make no apology for a system that will privilege in the future those who come to this country through a safe and legal route rather than those who pay people smugglers thousands of pounds and end up in the north of France instead. And the point on visa sanctions is related to the fact that many countries do not comply with us when we seek to return people lawfully to their own countries. And this is just one of the tools that we have at our disposal to have compliance with those countries so that they do take their own people back.
Iqbal Mahmood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given the UK's historical and ongoing involvement in unlawful military interventions alongside allies such as the United States and Israel, how does the Home Secretary assess the correlation between these foreign policy actions and wars and the displacement of populations resulting in increased numbers of refugees and asylum seekers arriving in the UK? And what steps will her government make toward proactive peace-building initiatives and the restoration of overseas humanitarian aid, which could address the root causes of displacement and reduce the long-term pressures on our asylum system?
Secretary.
Well, the government always plays its full part in peace processes wherever we can. We put our shoulder to the wheel on the delicate and diplomatic efforts that are required to bring conflicts to an end. But that is not actually what is relevant for what we're discussing today. We have a broken system today. We have thousands of people stuck in the system today. And we have thousands of people coming on boats through the north of France through reasons that are nothing to do with the British government. But we still fulfil our international obligations, and we will do so going forward as well. But I make no apology for wanting to move to a system where we incentivise safe and legal routes instead.
You know, stopping Sati and running the British Raj really wasn't worth it. If you went back in time and showed this to our ancestors, they'd think that we had lost a war. Maybe we did. Also, if all the wars in the Middle East stopped tomorrow, and I don't think that would be the case because, well, Muslims have been fighting non-Muslims for centuries now, so I don't think they're going to break the habit of a lifetime. Even if they all stopped tomorrow, and this man who, remind you, defended cousin marriage at length in Parliament had nothing to gin-brain out about, they would still be complaining that their co-ethnics and Muslims were not being imported into your country. They would still be calling us racist until we just kept importing their countrymen by the thousands. We could just say, no more of this, and not only not allow any more in, but also get rid of the ones that are here. Now, one relevant question was asked by Nick Timothy, who has been very sound on Islam and immigration, was radicalized during his time as a Home Office minister under the previous Conservative government, and he asked Mahmood if she likes the Danish model so much, will she, like Denmark, provide data that gives an ethnic breakdown of crimes and tax contributions? And Mahmood said no.
Deputy Speaker, most on the benches opposite disagree with us, but I share the Home Secretary's admiration for the Danish model, and the Danish Finance Ministry publishes data regularly on the fiscal contribution of different profiles of migrants. This shows in Denmark that migrants from MENAT, the Middle East, North Africa, Pakistan and Turkey are net recipients over the course of their lifetimes. Will the Home Secretary ensure that the Treasury publishes the same data in the same way in this country?
Well, we keep all statistics under review, as he knows, and as was the case, I believe, when he was an advisor to a former Home Secretary. And let me say to him that the principle that underpins all of these reforms is about fairness and contribution. We believe most people want to be able to contribute to this country because the refugees themselves recognise that is the best way for them to have stability and security in their lives, and it is what is needed for the wider community as well. And we think that all refugees, if they're on the protection work and study route, will have that opportunity. I'm not interested in models that start separating out different nations from one another. Once somebody has got status in our country, they are on a path to becoming one of us if they are working and contributing.
That's it. Your heritage and your identity can be boiled down to a piece of paper issued by a treacherous government, whether or not you are working and whether or not you are paying tax to the Leviathan state. I hate being lectured on what my identity constitutes by someone who shares none of my faith, none of my ancestry, and none of my vision of what the good life would constitute. Timothy's interjection is relevant here, though, because it reminds us who is going to be carrying out these supposed reforms, even if we are to take Mahmood at her word that she wants to end illegal migration. Bear in mind she just wants to make it legal. But if she wants to actually deport fake asylum seekers, who is going to be charged with the consultation, with enacting these policies, and with the day-to-day work of assessing asylum claims? Well, Nick Timothy, when he worked at the Home Office, did a report on whether or not civil servants are up to the task in 2023, and it was blocked for release by said civil servants because it was so damning, and it's only because the Times took legal action in 2025 that we now have it. And Shabana Mahmood, after this has been released, has complained that the Home Office is not yet fit for purpose, and is racked by a culture of defeatism. So how she expects these radical once-in-a-generation reforms to go through and actually get things done without meeting resistance is beyond me. It's almost like the purpose is the safe and legal routes, and all the tough talk is just the sales pitch to immigration restrictionists, and she hopes that they don't kick off and cause too much trouble and get it stopped. Nick Timothy wrote the report, and he identified a catalogue of failings across the department, which exacerbated the small boats crisis and left ministers unable to implement their policies. He found an overly defensive approach among the Home Office's lawyers, a reluctance by senior officials to tell difficult truths to ministers, an optimism bias that led to wildly inaccurate financial forecasting, and general distrust by other departments that was directly hampering operational issues such as deportations. Is it incompetence? Or is it willful and malicious non-compliance? Throwing grit in the gears of the engine of state, frustrating the agenda of elected ministers, who can be hired and fired, whereas senior civil servants, who get up to a year's severance pay if they are let go, can oppose their sacking, citing the Civil Service Code ensuring that it is neutral and therefore any intervention by an elected minister is considered political and improper, or just complaining about the Equality Act and saying that you're a racist, sexist, homophobe, etc. if you try to stop me from doing activism on the public dime on work time. And a lot of that was happening. In a particularly striking finding, the report said, quote, "There is a culture of defeatism among officers and a sense that high failure rates are an unavoidable fact of life in the system. The Home Office lawyers used the assessments of a likely legal challenge and even the possibility of a defeat as a reason not to do something. Poor legal work undermined cases. Immigration decisions were being, quote, quashed by the courts on the grounds they contained errors caused by poor processes and flawed reasoning. Civil servants had to rely on memory and consult confused Excel spreadsheets because there was such a disordered way of processing data that nobody knew what was going on. You would get different answers if you asked different people about the same question. Timothy said in the report, "Nobody knows who overall is responsible for this system. One official told him, ask what is going on and you get multiple different spreadsheets from multiple people. It takes a team of people weeks to answer a straightforward question." The level of dysfunction in the department was highlighted by councils who reported receiving calls from 3 different parts of the Home Office about the same issue, and in some cases, officials making bids for accommodation at the same sites as contractors operating on behalf of the department. So we're just doubling up on energy, effort, and even money spent on these illegal immigrants, rather than getting them out of the country. The report found that in key areas, officials routinely briefed ministers at the last minute on matters that required immediate decisions without all the needed content and context. The failure prevents ministers from taking the time to consider alternative assessments or options, with civil servants rarely being disciplined for this. Suella Braverman and Liz Truss have talked about this before, just saying that the civil servants know their position of privilege and deliberately bamboozle and sabotage ministers who are trying to get things done, like reducing migration or deporting illegal immigrants, so that a more compliant, less competent minister will be put in their place, and so the civil servants can get on with their open borders activism. And believe me, there were abundant incompetent ministers in the previous Conservative and now sitting Labour government. A follow-up essay for The Times, Timothy revealed the extent to which activists have captured the Home Office. Quote, "It is important to emphasise that many officials thought things should be done differently. Some complained about the time wasted by the fashion for what was called bringing your whole self to work. There were listening circles in which civil servants met to discuss their feelings about social and political issues. This included the implementation of government policies for which they were responsible, including the Rwanda scheme. The number of staff representative bodies based on various sexual, racial, or religious identities, the hours of staff time given to such work, and examples of training sessions about subjects such as genderqueer identities, also showed a lack of focus. Since Timothy wrote the report, The Times uncovered the role of the Civil Service Muslim Network, in whose meetings ministers were called vile and officials were advised to resist agendas with which they disagreed. This includes the Rwanda scheme, by the way, which is being revived by the current government despite them opposing it when it was proposed and then scrapping it when they got into government. Under the increasing removal section of the policy brief, it says that they are going to pursue return hubs. They are going to explore the use of return hubs, which are safe third countries that failed asylum seekers can be sent to instead of their country of origin. Negotiations with a number of countries are ongoing. This was the exact point of the Rwanda exchange scheme, which Keir Starmer, of all people, quite rightly mocked when Rishi Sunak was still Prime Minister, because they sent 3 Home Secretaries to Rwanda and billions of pounds, but no failed asylum seekers, and the scheme would allow a Rwandan to be sent to the UK for NHS treatment for every one illegal migrant sent. And we had to pay for 5 years of accommodation for every illegal migrant sent over to Rwanda, and if they committed crimes in Rwanda, like they did when they broke into Britain and often do in Britain, then Rwanda could send them back. No fees charged. Labour thought this was stupid, or at least they were using it as a political cudgel to beat the absurd previous Conservative government with, but now they're resurrecting it, with the same civil servants tasked to carrying it out. And instead of doing that, the civil servants are going to, for example, honour Transgender Day of Remembrance. Or, don't forget, they are going to continue advocating to influence policymakers to support Muslim needs and hire more Muslim staff members as part of the 700-member Muslim network in charge of counter-terror policy and immigration policy in the Home Office, one of whom already took a bribe from a Bangladeshi failed asylum seeker to overturn his rejected asylum application. Excuse me if I don't think Shabana Mahmood will break up this ethnic and religious cartel in the Home Office when she told The Times, sitting in front of a calligraphic depiction of the Shahada, the Muslim profession of faith, that, quote, "My faith, being a Sunni Muslim, is the centre point of my life and it drives me to public service. It drives me in the way that I live my life and I see my life. I believe that life is a gift from God, but it's also a test. I feel like I've been very blessed in my life, but every blessing is a test. It's not just something you bank for yourself. You should almost fear your success because now you have to answer for it, you have to use it for good, and that's how I think about my political career." Her political career is based on her Muslim faith, so she's not going to stop the Muslim network in the Home Office from deciding which asylum seekers are legitimate, which asylum seekers should be sent back according to Article 3, Article 2, and Article 8 appeals, and which countries are safe to return asylum seekers to. She also said it was a shame that so many left-wing MPs felt sheepish about talking about religion, noting the role that Christian and Jewish socialists played in creating the party. What an odd thing to say. So why is Shabana Mahmood doing this, then? Why is she giving out this contradictory messaging? Is it pure political opportunism? Is it hoping to take over from Keir Starmer when, seemingly inevitably, he's ejected from office? I don't think so. I think it's actually the online right. Not to give myself an inflated sense of self-importance, but reminder, when I shared this clip, it's at 600,000 views. It's highly likely that one MP at least has seen this because the grimacing cousin marriage advocate in question, Iqbal Muhammad, has me blocked. And Adnan Hussein was just arguing with me today about whether or not he's British. This is what he said, by the way. Nationality should be a birthright, not a revocable favour of the state. We don't have birthright to citizenship in this country, and he's advocating for bringing it back. And I said, you aren't British, you never will be, you were a Pakistani Muslim. Citing a tweet that he put out saying, do you think calling me a Pakistani is insulting? I'm extremely proud of my race and heritage, extremely. Everyone's a blood and soil nationalist for somewhere. Your people and your religion in no way contributed to building our nation, and you will not reproduce my civilization. If any of our ancestors were transported through time to the present, they would presume your presence in Parliament was a consequence of us having lost a war. You would call me racist if I said I am grateful for my heritage, and I am. You would accuse me of being a colonial chauvinist if I declared myself to be as Pakistani as you, or God forbid, sat in their parliament. We're bored of this blatant ethno-narcissism. We won't live by this double standard which allows foreign people to deny us our distinct identity and say they're just as British as us, while being blood and soil nationalists for their bit of the Indian subcontinent. My nationality is not your birthright. Adnan responded by saying, my being British is an absolute fact. Nothing you do or say will change that fact. And you can observe the ratio when I said, your claim to being British has no more basis in fact than a child's belief in the tooth fairy. I don't believe it. You don't believe it. You just want to wear my heritage as a skin suit. And we shouldn't allow them to. But who has been wearing our heritage as a skin suit is Shabana Mahmood. And she is very anxious about the fact that we would point out that it is a skin suit, because she realises that whether illegal or legal migration is contested, if multiculturalism is contested, if, as YouGov has said recently, 53% of the British public believe that being Muslim is incompatible with being British, then not just her future as the Prime Minister of this country, not just her career in Parliament, but her very presence in this country is contested. It is up for debate. And so she doesn't be seen to be tough on migration. If she doesn't contain public outrage about the issue, then she realises they're all going back, and so is she. And this is something that she said during the announcement, because when an MP from her left challenged her on whether or not this was the humane thing to do, she cited the slurs that had been said to her and being told, go home. This is clearly an animating anxiety for her, and Mahmood, who is quite politically savvy, sees the direction that politics is going, an increasing nativism among the indigenous population who recognise that their heritage exists, that every other group in their country is allowed to play identity politics at their expense, and they are denied political representation, and they are told not only that organising as a collective political community is racist, fascist, and literally Hitler, but also that their own heritage doesn't exist, and that someone can self-declare to be as British as you and me.
I have to say to the honourable gentleman, I wish I had the privilege of walking around this country and not seeing the division that the issue of migration and asylum system is creating across this country. Unlike him, unfortunately, I am the one that is regularly called a fucking Paki and told to go back home. It is I who knows through my personal experience and that of my constituents just how divisive the issue of asylum has become in our country. And I do say to him, I wish it were possible to say that there isn't a problem here, that there's nothing to see, and that it is all, in fact, just extremist, right-wing talking points. But this system is broken, and it is incumbent on all members of Parliament to acknowledge how badly broken broken the system is and to make it a moral mission to fix this system so that it stops creating the division that we all see. And I do say to him, I do not think it is acceptable or appropriate for people in this place to not acknowledge the real experience of those who sit outside of this House. We are supposed to be in here to reflect that experience in this House, and I hope that he will approach the debates that we will no doubt have on all of these measures in that spirit.
The problem is never the problem. The problem is only ever the far-right reaction to the problem, and the far-right are gaining far too much ground for Mahmood's liking, so she is seeking to return us to the Blairite conservative-era multicultural settlement before the Boris wave and the obscene daily reminder that we are being invaded presented by the boats crossing the channel woke everyone up to how their ancestral lands are being demographically swamped, ridden with crime and avoidable costs, and how their culture is being changed before their eyes. Shabana Mahmood wants this process to continue quietly without arousing the outrage of the electorate, and reform sweeping the red wall and annihilating the Labour Party. She wrote as much in The Guardian on the Sunday before the Monday she made these announcements. If you scroll through to the bottom, her motivation is that it is a moral mission for her because she knows that a country without secure borders is a less safe country for those who look like me. Dark forces are stirring up anger in this country and seeking to turn that anger into hate. We must take the opportunity we have to stop that from happening, and I know we can. The true nature of this country is openness, tolerance, and generosity. We want to provide sanctuary to those in danger. We want to be a greater Britain, not a littler England. So, even as she pretends to get a handle on the issue that we care about most, and even then it's only illegal, not legal migration, not only is she bringing more of her co-ethnics into our country via safe and legal routes, but she's insulting the English and saying that if you are an indigenous Brit, you have no claims to indigeneity, unlike the Palestinians in Gaza, for whom she goes out on constant marches to defend their land rights. But not only do you have no claim to saying you're indigenous to the land, but you don't get a say on who is in your home. And if you do, well, you're just a bitter, clinging little Englander. But do you know who is just as much a little Englander as you and me? Shabana Mahmood, who said, in September, at a Labour Party conference, that patriotism, hers being the patriotism of George Orwell, probably from 1984, where we are demanded 2 + 2 = 5 and Shabana Mahmood is an English woman, rather than The Lion and the Unicorn. But she said her patriotism is that of George Orwell, but patriotism is morphing into something darker, like ethno-nationalism, which says she can't be English. Bear in mind, she was born in Birmingham to 2 Pakistani parents, is a Sunni Muslim, and was brought up in Saudi Arabia.
It is a love of this country as an open, tolerant, generous place. But that broad vision of who we are is increasingly disputed. Patriotism, a force for good, is turning into something smaller, something more like ethno-nationalism, which struggles to accept that someone who looks like me and has a faith like mine can truly be English or British. There are some who we will never be able to persuade, but there are others, a growing number, who are on a path from patriotism towards ethno-nationalism. And this can be stopped.
She said it, blatantly. She is trying to contain the fact that people recognise they are English, that English is an ethnic identity, that they have been gaslit for decades by successive governments, and that the fact that there is an us and them has implications for immigration policy because not a single foreign criminal, uninvited guest, benefit scrounger, or person who will not recreate our civilization from abroad needs to be here. She wants to continue gaslighting you to insist that your heritage does not exist. It is just a matter of being given the appropriate passport or documents by a government who does not think there is anything distinct or admirable about what your ancestors built, and that she's annoyed by the fact that Steve Laws is continually in the comments beneath her tweets reminding her that she will never be English, that she's a Pakistani woman, and that she should go back to Pakistan. She said it again in Parliament.
We are a diverse one too. You can be English with roots here that stretch back 1,000 years, but you can also be English and look like me.
No, you can't. You are not English. You will never be English. You're a Pakistani Muslim woman. I do not recognise you as British, despite the contemporary legal fiction that allows you to LARP as British. You will not reproduce my civilization. I consider you to be an enemy occupying force in my government. And I am sick to the back teeth of people like Shabana Mahmood, who are ethno-nationalists for Pakistan or Palestine, who consider my presence in their governments over there to be proof of colonialism and imminent genocide, walking around in the hallowed halls of Westminster and pretending to be on our side when they just reconfigure immigration policy to make all of the criminal foreign men breaking into our country legal and continue the erasure of our historic homeland apace with minimal resistance to their demented political project. So I've written about this for Courage Media and on my Substack, where yet again you can go and you can subscribe and you can get some of these posts for free. Some of them are behind the paywall because I have to make a living, and at the moment I'm wholly independent. But all I just want to say is next time, for the people that were celebrating this because they thought this was a rhetorical win and that the based Muslim woman was using our talking points at the dispatch box, maybe read into the full policy document rather than rushing a video out or just firing off a tweet to get engagement, because this is going to be an unmitigated disaster on Boris wave level proportions. We are going to get thousands of Palestinian students and Afghan goat herders and Pakistani predators coming into our country exploiting the asylum system. But don't worry, guys, because it's not illegal. We can't argue, right?